Welcome to Bad and Desi, a podcast where we unpack life through cultures. In a world where brown boys are told to stay strong, stay silent, and never cry, this is a space to talk about everything that they never got to say out loud. You look uncomfortable already. Today's guest is someone whose work speaks louder than he ever will, and I know he's already kind of uncomfortable because he hates compliments. He's a globally recognized South Asian wedding photographer based in Sydney, or as he likes to call it, a professional third wheeler. He's passionate about storytelling, connection, and creative chaos of weddings. But don't bother complimenting him. He's just going to get really awkward about it. Today's not about the hype though. We're going to delve in a little bit more deeper about what you feel, what you fight, and what you fear. We're going to go behind the lens and beyond the surface. Thank you, Kartik, for being here today.
That was great, by the way. That was great. I'm already still uncomfortable with that introduction.
While I was writing it out, I was like, I can imagine him like cringing every single time I say a word. Yeah.
But thank you. That was really beautifully written. So I appreciate that.
Oh, also, he's a professional cultural dancer.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And he's also my friend, and he's a great person. And I'm gonna keep making you cringe.
I suppose if we keep like repeating that narrative, then it'll be okay, right? Like you just get better the more you do uncomfortable things, I suppose. So.
That's true. Okay, Kartik, again, thank you so much for being here today. I'm not going to get into anything too deep right now because I can feel you cringe. But what I'm going to do is just ask some really quick rapid fire questions.
Go for it.
You ready?
Yeah.
First thing, what's the weirdest thing you've been asked to shoot?
Weirdest thing I've been asked to shoot, probably OnlyFans content. Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, probably OnlyFans content.
Bold.
Yeah. Very bold. Very bold.
Did you accept it?
You know what's funny is my entire motto for life is do everything once. So I did.
Amazing.
I did. And
I love that.
It was very uncomfortable. It was very uncomfortable. Yeah.
That's what life's about.
It is.
Being uncomfortable to grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was like a really strong start to a rapid fire questionnaire.
Now I'm thinking about this out loud. I'm like, this is going to be interesting. Yeah.
Okay. What's your go-to when you experience a creative block?
Look to other creators. Ask what gets them inspired, what makes them creatively really like themselves. Because I think for me, it's like whenever I've found or have caught myself in a bit of a block, I look at other creators and ask myself, okay, what inspires them? What makes them as passionate to create in their own respective fields? And what can I really gain and learn from that? So probably, look to other creators.
What do you feel is one thing that people assume about you that might not be correct? That you're not a dancer?
Actually, yeah. No one actually really knows that. No one really knows it until I tell them that. And it's not really on my socials anywhere until you scroll down like feeds and stuff. I've really embraced myself within the South, like that South Asian culture, and I think that's something that I absolutely love. It's something that I really enjoyed as a teenager, and I love that I got into it. But yeah, no one really picks that up when we do speak, and I'm okay with that. It's not something that I'll just bring in conversation.
Hey, I'm Kartik, and I'm a dancer.
It's not exactly the things I get known by. So yeah, so I think probably that.
Okay, now obviously there's a lot to you, but if you were to introduce yourself to the world, how would you summarize yourself?
On my Instagram bio, it is probably the 3 words, professional third wheeler, I guess. And it's a big part of who I am. It's not the only part of who I am. Some part of me explains it's like a documentarian of love, which I really appreciate as well. I get to be part of people's love stories, their journeys, and I use my craft to capture moments between people. So it's a big part of I guess my personal identity, tying in with some sense of South Asian culture, as I predominantly stick to that field. That's kind of a bit about who I am in like a nutshell. I think it's also ever evolving. I don't think a decade ago I was this person either. So I'm probably assuming in a decade's time from now I'm going to be something completely different. But for now, it's a brown guy who appreciates a lot of love between brown people. So.
And third wheels for a living.
Yeah. It's a great self-proclaimed title, which I'm really enjoying right now.
I love it. It's a great way to summarize yourself.
Yeah.
How did you get into photography?
That's a great question. I remember being in corporate, working my graduate role, and I wasn't exactly happy or passionate about what I was doing.
Mm.
My mentor at the time gave me a book called Ikigai. It's a great Japanese concept that essentially helps you identify your passion and purpose. And that book talks about 4 questions: what do you like? What are you good at? What does the world need? What can you get paid for? So then when I sat down and actually answered those questions, for me, I was good at creativity. I was a creative kid growing up. And I also had a marketing degree. So I identified that is something that I wanted to keep at the very foundation of a career. What I liked was relationships. And I thought anyone who was lucky to be around love were very fortunate people. And I thought if I could merge some sense of relationships with some level of creativity, I thought wedding photography was a great way to proceed forward. And the last 2 questions were easy. The world needed wedding photographers and they could get paid quite well.
Mm.
4 weeks later, I quit my job and never looked back. So.
Bold.
Reckless as well. But yeah, I like the bold adjective a lot more.
Any part of that decision that you might regret?
Not doing it sooner.
Okay, that's amazing. I feel technically the same about my life right now as well. Very similar, like you have to make really crazy decisions sometimes where you don't actually see the repercussions of today, but tomorrow.
Absolutely. But I also think, could you argue as well, being reckless is probably a good trait in that regard? Do you think that's probably helped you to identify, okay, I'm going to take a risk here and do something very left of field?
Yeah.
Right? Do you think that's worked out for you personally within your career choices as well?
Absolutely. However, the podcast is about you, Kartik. So we're going to dial this
I
back
can't
to
ask
you.
questions. I can't engage with my host. That's not the way this works?
Today is about uncovering a little bit more about you there. I feel like you have a lot to uncover.
This is so uncomfortable.
I know. But let's keep it a bit more calm. What's the best part about what you do?
That I get to learn about love. Yeah. I get to really identify how people express their own versions of love. I get to understand people's love stories, their journeys, their challenges. I think that equally ties in with some level of my craft being able to take me to all these beautiful places around the world. I just came back from New Zealand literally yesterday. And in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to Greece. Again, God's grace. This is not a flex by any means. This is not something I'm trying to be like, oh, look at me.
Amazing.
No, that's not me.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate. The one thing that I deeply admire, which is relationships and love, I get to be around a lot. So I get to learn about all of that stuff too.
Exactly. From the outside world, you're traveling, you're doing great. It's extremely successful where you're at, and touch wood, you are, as much as you hate to admit it. You're doing amazing.
Thank you.
Now, obviously, while you're, touring the world, doing all this...
Touring the world, wow. Makes you sound like some celebrity. Okay, I wouldn't exactly put it that way, but all right, yeah, sure.
While you're working, what's something that you feel like you might internally struggle with?
Missing home. Missing home. I've realized that it sounds like a glamorous lifestyle when you get to say to your friends, my craft or my camera is taking me to Europe or America or to India. But the reality of the person that I am is that, albeit that's a really cool lifestyle and that's awesome to, travel the world and photograph and all of that stuff, I think the part that I always struggle with is missing home. Yeah. And home for me has always been with my friends and family. And albeit I've established different areas of home around the world, maybe with different friends, but I grew up in Australia and Sydney, and my home is rooted with the people that have raised me and the friends that I'm very close with. So I guess coming to reality with that is the biggest struggle that I probably have.
Now, in terms of going back to that topic about struggling, internally struggling, do you feel like you've ever experienced imposter syndrome because you're obviously gaining all this brand recognition, or do you feel like that's a myth?
No, you're absolutely right. I think imposter syndrome is very normal. It's such a reality for anyone who is unsure about their skills or accolades, about the person that they are, about the confidence and competence of the things that they can be as well. All the time, I think I look at my own craft thinking it's not good enough, or I ignore the last 8 years of my career thinking it's shit, it could be better. Or I look at other creators as well and feeling inspired by what they're doing, going, I'm not pushing myself hard enough. And I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded by great people that remind me of my own, wins. And I think you're the biggest testament to that. So thank you. And I use that as a voice to go, actually, no, I should, believe in the things that I've done and achieved. So it's a balancing act. There are moments where you tip too much to the left and you're like, oh, I'm not XYZ great enough. And then there are moments at the right where you're like, actually, no, you know, I'm doing okay. I'm confident. I've got great skills and talent. And I think that changes every week. It's not really a consistent, solid belief in my own self, but it's a delicate balance that I'm all right with.
I say this every single time. You bring out the personality of people that you haven't met before to actually get them to a level where they're comfortable with you, which says a lot about you putting aside your emotions and who you are on the day to prioritize the couple that you're shooting.
You know, it's been a mission to try and be okay with how I compartmentalize all of that, and now I'm at a very okay spot to know that life's going to happen in the background, and I still want to be this positive person, and 90% of the time I usually am, and there's the odd 10% that sort of gets to me, but I thank you, I appreciate that. I think it's an ongoing journey, and I don't know if I fully mastered it, but I'm still getting better at trying to be the most optimistic or positive person or version of myself, which as a wedding photographer I think is quite important.
So obviously when you're pushing things aside, they end up collecting.
I suppose it doesn't mean that I'm ignoring it. It just means that for the temporary time being, I'm just going to park it and revisit it when I'm at a much better space with the resources and the emotional mindset to do so. And I think that's okay. That is okay. I think I used to come down hard on myself to say that I'm going to figure this out before I get to that wedding, and you won't. I think that's just life general. I don't think you should put a timeline on when you should come to the answers of the things that you're struggling with. I think you should learn to identify that these things will take time, and to be really compassionate to yourself when that happens. And that's been a wonderful journey to go on since.
You're exactly right. Processing emotions, depending on what you're processing, happens through different durations and different times and different avenues. Now, talking about that, how do you usually process emotions when we're, for example, in a business environment? Let's talk about the context of the business stress. You can talk to maybe like your business partner's issue solution and then deadline tracker. Like that's a way to process an emotion or a situation and make it actionable. Now, in the creative world, you're dealing in an environment where there's so much emotion, you've got emotion inside you. How do you process your emotions?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting from a creative standpoint. I've always looked at it as, say, on a wedding day, which is my office, right? There's a lot happening in front of me in terms of the bride and what she's going through, the groom, the bride's family, the groom's family. Then there are parts of my own brain that yearns for things or is imagining things or has its own emotional tendencies as well, which is very normal. I think the first thing that I do is to acknowledge that these emotions are actually very acceptable and very normal, that you can give yourself permission to really feel these things and not demonize yourself for going, I feel sad, or I feel envious, or I feel XYZ adjective. I think you need to be really comfortable with sitting with all of your thoughts in, especially a creative space when things are at it's such a high tendency. That is weddings, right? That is the concept of weddings. Everything's so emotionally high and driven. I'm not shy about this. I have gone to therapy and still go, and it's something that I'm very proudly acknowledging because I don't think it's talked about all the time. But it's something that I know has allowed me to really navigate this space in a very compassionate and delicate way. But the first part is just being very aware of the fact that I am allowed to feel all of the emotions, from whatever I would feel on the day. And that usually sets up a great paradigm to carry me forward for the next 24 hours at least anyway.
Such a good point, especially about, you are allowed to feel emotions. Growing up, do you feel like you ever had that sort of stereotypical view come from society or maybe your immediate family or friends that you're not meant to feel emotions as a man?
Yeah, I think this definitely ties in broader to the topic of what we are supposed to talk about today in terms of emotions, but also tied in with masculinity. I think this is a very sensitive topic for a lot of men only because there wasn't that permission to feel that space. It wasn't always a safer space growing up as a young boy, as a teenage male, and as a full-grown adult today, where your emotions are looked at as a sign of weakness, not as a sign of strength. And it creates this paradigm where you tell yourself that you're not allowed to express. And it sets up this really awful way of living that you then enter into your relationships, into your professional life, into other areas of your adulthood that takes a very big impact on. And I think not allowing myself to feel that as a kid and even as a teenager has definitely led to really big implications that I forbid myself to ever resort to. And I think now it's at a space where I look at what it means to be comfortable as a man to express my emotions, as opposed to as a young boy who was afraid, and really sit well with the bravery and the act and courage that that takes, as opposed to the previous version of me that looked at this as a sign of weakness or lesser than or lack of.
Mm-hmm.
And shifting that definition was and still is a journey in its own. And I think women do this a lot better than men. I think men definitely do not prioritize their emotional vulnerability as a sense of strength. I think they look at it as a downplay on the person that they are, and I think it's really important to reframe that paradigm.
You also mentioned therapy. Now, is that something that was readily available to you? Did you feel at any point that, you know, it wasn't right for you to go to therapy? Anything that stopped you from doing that?
What's interesting is that South Asian culture doesn't really encourage the concept of therapy. So even before I began to realize what therapy was, I think there was just this subconscious understanding that we just don't talk about these things. So there's that aspect of it. Then there's the aspect of that the only people in my life that expressed their emotions were women, not men. I could argue literally there's only less than 5 times I've ever seen my dad cry in my entire life. And those two were at the extreme moments of vulnerability where it was bad. So you look at the way that a boy in his youth is raised to believe that we don't express our emotions, that the only people that do cry are women, not men. And it makes you believe that therapy isn't a resort that you should ever go to. And it's only until you have things crashing down on you that you realize, holy shit, I've got stuff that I need to address here. And if I don't, it's going to consume me. And I was very fortunate that, at least in my upbringing and my circumstances, I have a lot more women in my life as influences. My sisters, my cousins, my best friends are all women. People that I dance with at these Indian classical dances are all women, and they have been the most safest space for me growing up, which I recognize as a big strength and advantage to the person that I am today. But it's through that safety that encourages conversations of, hey, have you ever thought about therapy? Hey, you've mentioned XYZ, and I think that could be a blockage for something else. Hey, by the way, that seems to be a bit of a nerve. And those conversations really encourage you to think about what could therapy really look like, despite not having the encouragement as a child when you think you could have talked about your thoughts and feelings. And this is something that I'm very passionate about today. It's like, again, when I tell men that I go to therapy or that I've been, the reaction is also very interesting. It's like, oh, and it's different. And you acknowledge that it's different, by the way. But that's okay, because it's about having that conversation and allowing yourself to really challenge the narrative of what they believe is acceptable. And until we don't do that, it's never really going to change, I don't think.
Absolutely. Do you feel like that paradigm is shifting?
It's getting better. It's getting better. I think a lot more men are receptive to being okay with expressing their thoughts and feelings. I also think this goes hand in hand with how women are raising young boys as well now, where conversations of expressing your thoughts and feelings are very encouraged in a very safe space and paradigm. I think there is this culture where it is sexy for men to go to therapy. I've seen this on dating profiles all the time, which I think is really interesting.
Really?
Yeah, where people's prompts are like,
I can see why.
Right. And I never looked at it as such a attractive state, which I thought was really interesting.
That's right. It's
yeah.
kind of like, that the man acknowledges, first of all, that they don't need to have that shield on all the time, and they're doing the work.
How do you feel as a woman if you hear a man saying to you, I go to therapy? Like, what goes through your mind when that happens?
I completely agree with what you said before. Like, I think it's so attractive to know that someone is working on themselves. Because as much as you go to the gym to work on your body, there is a part of you that needs to work on your mentals,
Absolutely.
your emotions,
Absolutely.
your thoughts, the trauma that you might have experienced growing up, where you maybe didn't have that support.
Absolutely.
But now we have to be more reactive. This generation, I feel like we are really reactive. We have to unpack what we've experienced in our youth. But as you mentioned, now you have this generation of women who are a little bit more educated, they have more access to resources to know how to nurture their child, so they're more proactive. So ideally you have this new generation of emotionally mature people that are woke, that are healed. And it's just, I feel like our generation is the healing generation. We're doing the work.
It's funny because I was like, I think every maybe 4th or 5th video on TikTok that I'll doom scroll at night, seems to tackle some, and maybe that's just my algorithm, by the way, so I don't know if other men have the same algorithm as mine, but seems to talk about some level of trauma or therapy. And I guess my feed is built in a way where every fifth or sixth video, I appreciate that. So now there's resources that are so more common than what we used to have, right? And it's such a commonly talked about thing. And I think when you're surrounded by these messages, both directly from friends who, popularize conversations like mental health, but also through social media that now talk about the impacts of mental health, then you're becoming more receptive to being open to the idea, right? I'm sure you could probably go through your Instagram or your TikTok feed and go like, oh yeah, like every sixth video is something on, trauma, or you learn something about how to manage conflict or how to talk about your emotions, right?
I think it's like, obviously the algorithm is such a crazy thing to think about, and that's a whole topic for another session. But it relates to the phase of life that you're in. So after I experienced a breakup, my entire feed was healing, being solo.
The algorithm is very beautiful in that way.
It's kind of scary.
Yeah, it's concerning how much it knows what you need, and I find that very interesting in a somewhat scary way.
Exactly. And then recently I've gone into a phase where I was like, I need to learn how to be a bit more articulate. Obviously, a new podcast, this is a skill that I'm learning. Now I have these videos that are targeting me on how to improve your interpersonal connections, how to, speak confidently. So obviously algorithm is a different conversation.
Nice. We could spend probably another episode on
it could be a little bit more technical. But you're right. What you consume is what you feel and what you share. So obviously, as you mentioned, your algorithm is a little bit more tailored to, as you said, as you doom scroll at night, it's a little bit more, trauma, healing.
Oh, I mean,
therapy.
Bits and bobs of it, yeah. Like
I would imagine it to be a little bit more wedding photography.
Yeah, for sure. I think right now it's a combination of wedding photography, going to the gym, somewhat dance, stupid humor, which I absolutely love. Dogs, random, and healing in some regards.
I feel like it shapes your personality.
Yeah, look, it does. When I realize that something doesn't actively serve me, though, I'll actively go out of my way and go the not interested thing.
Yep.
Because I'm like, this is kind of irrelevant. But the stuff that is pretty cool, I allow it to be there. I'm trying to be self-aware of the stuff that I consume because it's so monotonous, and you really
absolutely
expose yourself to content that could be harmful.
That's true. There's so much brain rot. Like, there's an actual terminology called brain rot now.
Really?
I only came across it through, again, a TikTok.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, makes sense.
It's just because it's content that will rot your brain. It's just like a video of potato rolling, and people will watch that.
So addictive, though. But it's again, it's a dopamine hit that we like. It's random. It could be stuff that is a trending meme that your friends send you, and you're like, oh, this is funny.
Exactly.
But on the masculinity trend, it's so funny because there are videos that I see of women who they're getting interviewed on the streets by interviewers who, when they're asked from other men, how do you feel when men cry? They say, and I quote, and I'm not saying, by the way, all of it, but the videos I have watched, I get the ick. Or that it is disgusting, or it's and it reinforces this really horrible message that men don't or shouldn't cry, or that men that express weakness through vulnerability are not deemed as suitable partners, and it is concerning.
And I think that completely contributes what you said earlier, where men going to therapy is attractive, but men crying is an ick.
It's like
what does a man do?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. Like, depending on your perspective on vulnerability and your grasp with that term, you could look at it as he's doing the work, or he's broken and he's weak. And men who have a very bad association with that definition will lean on the other side, where they go, okay, cool, I mustn't show my emotion, I mustn't express the way I feel because it's not deemed as attractive. So it goes equally both ways, and I think we need to really redefine the language that gets used when it talks about certain things like that, and to also be cautious of the content we're consuming when it talks about things like that. And so, this is an opportunity for me today to express my version of it. And I guess it's different because it wasn't something that was popularly talked about from the voice of all the men that were active in my life. Women did a much better job at this, so kudos to you guys. But men didn't, and it was a scary space. It was a scary space.
I'm just curious. So when, obviously, I have two brothers, and I'm a sister, so I share absolutely everything about my life with these guys.
Love that.
So sometimes they share some things with me too. But in terms of ratio, it's just me yapping and them just consuming and then being like, yeah, right, just get over it. Now, in your environment, obviously you've got more female friends. Do you feel like there is a support environment where you've constantly shared things, or still you've held back, maybe haven't shared just to keep up that masculinity?
Yeah, no, what's interesting is that I'm very grateful and fortunate that the women that are present and active are very safe people. And so safety for me is a very big thing. It's something that I've always identified and loved as well. So when I have thought about moments of me being vulnerable with these women, it's because they've provided me with an environment of safety to do so. And so any moment that comes where I can share something, if I want to, I know it's usually going to be met with grace, a sense of compassion, a sense of empathy and kindness, and a sense of acceptance that, hey, you know what, thank you for sharing. And my sister does an incredible part of this. She's my best friend and I love her to death about it. My mum as well, she's awesome. She's really great at listening. My closest friends who have great emotional intelligence create a very safe environment for me to just be vulnerable. I would argue what that life would look like if that wasn't. Because I would probably restrict myself, or at least find other means that would be safe, as opposed to looking at women. I would try and find something else that equally does something great. But I just have been fortunate that my vulnerability has been met with a lens of safety as opposed to anything else.
Do you share the same things that you share with your female friends with your male friends?
No. But there are exclusions to that. There are overlapping tendencies on some topics, not every topic. I've realized that when I talk to friends of business, it's going to be a few guy mates I'm very close with. I've also acknowledged that when I talk to people about my thoughts and feelings, it's usually women. So there is that awareness of the way that I dissect those two categories. However, there is an overlap at some point, and I think that is dependent on the person I'm sitting across the table with. There have been men in my life, and I've spoken to you about this as well, where I've recognized the sensitive side that gives me permission to equally be sensitive. It's like that saying, vulnerability gives people permission to be vulnerable as well. And so when I acknowledge that in certain men, it gives me the space to be vulnerable just as much. When I acknowledge that in women, it tends to allow me to do the same. I just think more women have done that more than more men. It's not to say that I can't go to a guy mate that I have and talk to him about my thoughts and feelings. I'm sure I can. It's just there is this initial hesitance that I probably will face, but once I get through that, then they're okay. And these are great men, the men that I've selected very carefully in my life, because I know not all men are very okay with these conversations. And so these are great men that I really appreciate.
Yeah, perfect. I completely agree. I feel like obviously I've seen the way that my brother's friend groups up. I don't see them sharing anything personally or, being vulnerable with each other. And I'm always curious because when I talk to my girls, I'm like, as I told you, I yap about every single emotion I'm experiencing because that's how I process things.
Do you think women just innately provide this safer space without any conscious knowledge of it? Like, they're just so deep-rooted and fundamentally who they are. I've just been curious because I would love that paradigm with a lot of men. I just don't think it exists nearly as equally as women.
I think there's that sort of motherly naturehood that's like within you.
That like nurturing aspect of it. Yeah.
So you're more emotional. Obviously, the psychology aspect of it, I'm not like too aware of.
Right.
But I'm sure there is something that naturally makes you more of a, emotional healer. A provider.
I also think, and this is a topic that I've always been curious about because I read this book, which I love, and I think a lot of men should read it. It's called Man Enough by Justin Baldoni. An incredible read that talks about masculinity, but it talks about the youth of a boy expressing their vulnerabilities and emotions and what that is perceived or met with at a very young age. And in school, unfortunately, it's not the best paradigm, and you get taught in a very quick and harsh reality of when you are afraid or when you are expressive, that is teased at, that is laughed at, mocked at even, and people call you these names that you then resonate with as going, okay, vulnerability equals XYZ. Not going to happen anymore. And that's the problem. And that is the problem, which is why growing up, my entire social circle were women. And I preferred it that way because it was just that much more safer than men. And then when you then become an adult, that narrative comes and travels on. You associate that you just cannot be a man to express and open up your emotions to other men because you think that from a teenage years, that's going to be met with some level of negative criticism. And it creates this really bad paradigm that really sandbox men into being a particular version that women don't want, men are struggling with. And so how do you really navigate that space is a very difficult part, which is why I'm envious of girl groups, which is why I love it when girls talk about, you know, their thoughts and feelings, because men just don't have that. And when we do have that, it's different. We talk about business, we talk about getting ahead, we talk about competition, we talk about things that are going to make us better human beings through the gym or something like that. It's not about, hey, like, what's your happiness index out of 10? Or when was the last time you cried? Or how are you dealing with that bit of trauma? And again, as much of these conversations aren't common, I wonder what a lifestyle would be if it was.
You raised some really interesting things, because this is actually, Jenny's behind the camera right now. We were talking about this before this podcast, that men actually, they've got large groups, but in terms of substance and what they talk about, it's not that heavy in terms of women who might have smaller groups. Like, I don't know how common this is, but I've got a very, very, very close circle of women. That's it. But the connection that we have is really strong. But you see sometimes in today's society, it's large groups of men, no substance, smaller groups of women, lots of substance. What do you feel about that? Do you feel like that's true?
It's funny because I'm thinking about the close group of guy mates I've got, and I'm thinking about our hangouts, which usually involve KFC, and shout out to KFC. They should be a sponsor. And I'm thinking about all the conversations we have, and it ranges from Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z, business marketing, what's going on in the wedding industry, what's going on in their industry, talking about just random shit that we got up over the weekend. Now, that's not bad. There's a cool space for that. But it sometimes can only ever be that. And I think I acknowledge that does restrict men from being expressive in different ways. It also reinforces conversations that they think that they should talk about more than other conversations. And that in its own is also fueling a problem that I think a lot of men are craving and yearning to combat, where they're like, how do I open up to my boys, people that I love, but not be ridiculed for the things that I'm about to say? And some men are great at it. Some men are really good at it. The biggest thing that I've always really, rooted for is the fact that if anyone were to come and sit next to me, I want it to be the safest space possible. And I know we've had conversations around this, but for me, I think because I've always craved safety, it's the one thing I want to make sure I express, at least for other people, so that within the proximity of anyone, coming up to me, making them feel accepted, seen, heard, and just generally safe is probably my own expression of love that I could give to that person, because I know how difficult it is for people out there, albeit men and women. So
now we've raised a lot about vulnerabilities, and maybe in situations where you've had to avoid vulnerabilities, maybe that's because of your friendship group or because of your gender that you identify with. What do you think, and in your experience, if there's any examples that you've experienced, is the cost of avoiding vulnerabilities?
Impactful on so many different paradigms. You can look at it from different lenses, through the lens of your career, personally, professionally. You could look at it through the lens of relationships, through the acceptance of expressing how you feel to your loved ones, both family or romantic. You could look at your own psychology and development as a male, and what that could limit you as if you are restrictive on the way you think. In terms of, at least from a romantic or even context of, say, just relationships, you get to a point where your inability to express, or the lack of encouragement around expressing, or your association with weakness and expressing vulnerabilities limit you, but also impact your relationships greatly. Women, and please correct me on this, are yearning for men who are more open, more expressive of the way they feel, more in tune with their thoughts and feelings, their emotions, because it helps them to grow, it helps the relationship to grow, and it helps them to also identify that women aren't mind readers. Right? Women don't know what goes on in a man's life. Women think that men are composed and that they are strong and always this outer shell that seems appeared happy.
That's so true.
But the root cause of that could be very different. And what's going on behind the scenes is also very different. We get taught as young boys to be this pillar that is strong on the outside, that people don't really see the foundational insides. They think that it's successful based on how hard they work, how much money they earn, how successful they are, how good grades they can achieve, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second that you look at it from, oh, this person's sad and this person is crumbling with some sort of anxiety, you look at them as lesser than or not perceived as strong enough, or at least society deems it that way. But so when these thoughts creep up in a man's world about what it is to be a man, he then shuns himself from the truth and the reality of his expression of his emotions, and that can impact a relationship tenfold. You get men who are afraid of expressing themselves to their partners. They believe in these gender roles where men are supposed to be these strong, outer-shelled, muscled people who can just face any problem in the world because that's what they got taught to do.
Yeah.
And they think that this is going to be acceptable within a relationship. And then when there's moments where women are like, talk to me, express to me how you feel, it's met with either silence or this avoidance, where men don't want to sit down at the table to talk about, I'm actually really struggling. Or they're afraid to even cry, right? And one of my favorite questions to ask people is, when was the last time you cried? And it's a really fun conversation starter. But you get to a point where men are just being. They're not really themselves. They are operating on this autopilot structure, and there is this blockage of vulnerability that allows them to let people in, and a sense of shame and a sense of judgment and fear that they might have. And I can think about a lot of times where men perhaps could have been vulnerable, but then that was met with this sense of rejection from their parents, from their loved ones, from their partners. And just because that wasn't taken or handled in the best way doesn't predict the way it can be in the future. You know, I can remember moments in my life in childhood where I was telling my parents, I don't think business is right for me. It's a vulnerable conversation. It's a conversation about my career, and that wasn't met very well. I remember that conversations around my grades weren't high enough, and I felt that I wasn't loved enough. And there's an association with performing, right? Because that's what men get taught. You need to perform. You need to be X, Y, Z. You know, this instilled hard work ethic that my dad brought to the table because he was the protector and provider really sets up a paradigm where you believe that you have to be the exact same, and if you're anything less than that, you're not deemed as worthy as. And you really begin to restrict yourself in so many facets, from family lifestyle to your career choices, because you have to fit this mold, right? To your relationships, where the partner that you believe needs you to be this very strong, this macho thing. And even your own psychology, where you struggle with the terms of, I'm feeling emotional, therefore I'm weak, but that's not really the case. So there's so many implications that this has on men that I don't know if men are really putting in the work to figure out. I don't know if they believe or have redefined the terms of what it means to be emotional or vulnerable. And if we don't learn as a society to really accept men and how broken that they can appear and perhaps are, we can't then learn to relearn their definition of what it means to be vulnerable. And that's an ongoing conversation. I just feel women do that a lot better, or a lot more frequently than men. And the way that their relationships are, the way that their lifestyles are also different to the way that men perhaps yearn to have, but can't, for all these various reasons.
That was such a beautifully
Went on a
articulated.
tangent. Don't even know. No,
I just let you speak, because what you just said relates to such a large set of an audience. You've related to obviously men, vulnerable men that might struggle to actually be vulnerable, women in relationships that are struggling to actually get their partner to speak up, parents, teachers, children. This relates to absolutely everyone.
Definitely.
So I did not want to interrupt that at all. I knew before starting this conversation with you that we will end up on a tangent.
It's like going at it for like just different.
Might be more important, which is amazing, and I'm so happy that you brought that up. To wrap today up. Now, obviously, there's a lot that we've talked about, and there's a lot to unpack here. Sure. This podcast is not enough to uncover everything that we want to talk about. What's one piece of advice that you'd give to a man that might be struggling to express themselves?
Absolutely. I was thinking about this question actually on the way here, And it was something that I perhaps wish I got taught when I was a young boy. But first of all, I think it's about letting go of the definition of what it means to be vulnerable. I think that's associated with this perception of weakness and this state of lack of or lesser than. I think I really want to encourage a conversation like that to be had in a lot of people's households. I think women are doing a great part as mothers, as older sisters or younger sisters, to really encourage men to think about what it means to be vulnerable. So that plays an important part. The other aspect of this that I think is a big conversation here, but it's also a boy's ability to question and understand gender roles as well. I think when they begin to think of what their dad does, it skews them in a way of what they believe masculinity is. And masculinity, according to a young boy at the time who's grown and raised by a father who provides and protects and is only known for work, makes them believe that they have to be strong in every facet of their life, which is not the case. And even strength is defined as a very particular sentence. And I think that's where we can really begin to relearn, I guess, what masculinity actually means or what it means to be really vulnerable. So I hope that helps.
Hope that helps. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kartik. I know a lot of people that have watched the episode today would have related to you. If there's an avenue to reach you, how can they contact you for advice?
Sure. I'm sure you can find me through my socials, my photography page or my personal page. Could be in the show notes, I'm not sure. But if there's one thing that I stand by what I've said today, more than anything, is that safety is a very big thing for me. So stopping me in whatever context to have a conversation is more than welcome. I love this chat, which is why I've also wanted to be here. And just knowing that if there is a person who's watching this is going to take away anything from this, it's that hopefully you can come up to me and have a conversation about any of it, because it's going to be met with compassion and safety and a big sense of care.
I can vouch for that. Compassion, safety, and a lot of fun and honesty. You're a great man, and I know that you're going to cringe every single time I say that.
Every time.
Kartik is amazing.
Every time.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is incredible.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us today as well. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe. And I actually cringe when I say that.
Oh, you got to do it though. Call to actions are really important.
CTAs.
Because if people don't, do all of that stuff, then no one's going to find this.
That's it.
There you go.
Like, follow, subscribe.
Weirdest thing I've been asked to shoot, probably OnlyFans content.